A 5-year investigation by officers from the National Crime Agency into child sex abuse offences against teenage girls in Rotherham in the early 2000s is set to conclude tomorrow. And I'm joined now by our national reporter, Charlie Peters, who's outside Sheffield Crown Court. Charlie Peters, a very, very emotional days of evidence today. You were inside the courtroom as two of those survivors gave their victim impact statements. Astonishing testimony given. Charlie Peters, tell us more.
Well, after a 20-year wait for justice, a 5-year-long investigation and a 9-week-long trial, today was the opportunity for those victims to give their impact statements, to tell the defendants directly how their actions had impacted them. Well, earlier this afternoon at Sheffield Crown Court, those 7 defendants arrived and sat in the dock. One required an Urdu interpreter as the lead prosecutor in this case, a barrister called Nicholas Lumley, set out a summary of what the court had heard earlier in the year after they were convicted for a string of child sexual offences in June of this year. He said that the complainants were preyed upon by the men. Each of them, he said, were engaging in grooming and had aggressively forced the victims to engage in sexual activities. He said that the defendants denied the acts. They also denied knowing the complainants. Some of them made that move in the trial. That meant that both of the survivors had to be cross-examined during the trial. He also recounted how each of the survivors during that investigation also had to pick out the defendants in a defendant and a perpetrator process. So that, he said, had extended the suffering that they had experienced as part of this harrowing and appalling ordeal. Now, much of the abuse related to this trial and this case took place in the mid-2000s, from 2003 to 2008. Now, the complainants were aged just 11 and 15 at the start of the abuse, and the court heard that the NCA investigation established that some of the abuse took place in a car park, in supermarket car parks, in a cemetery, and in one shocking case, even by a nursery where primary school children were being looked after. Now, during this trial, we heard about the impact that the abuse had on the complainants, but today they had the opportunity to put that forward to the defendants themselves, who sat in the dock as one of the survivors stood up and addressed them directly, reading her victim impact statement. She detailed how one of them had forced her to take a virginity test at the age of 11. They said that virginity was disgusting. She described how she had been abused and raped by over 150 men by the time she turned 16. She talked about the campaign of violence that she experienced, the trafficking throughout England from Rotherham, where she was based, how her phone was taken away, threatened with violence, subjected to sexual acts and rapes from the ages of 11 to 16. And in her statement, she said, "I don't want to give you too much of my time. You've already had all of my childhood and the majority of my adulthood. For years, I've suffered and still do with flashbacks." She said that she sometimes gets a whiff of one of her abuser's smells, and sometimes she still hears their laughs. "I wake up screaming from nightmares, even when I'm highly medicated. This still happens." Just a portion of some of the suffering that she detailed in the court in an extremely emotively charged delivery. She said, "You ruined my life, but I won't let you ruin my future. I'm a fighter and a survivor. I am thriving and I am fighting. You can't and won't take anything from me ever again." She continued, 22 years ago, you started to groom me. 10 years ago, I started my campaign for justice. You stole my childhood. Now I'm taking your freedom. I am your karma. She delivered those words looking directly at all 7 defendants, all of them who avoided to return her eye contact, many of them staring down at the floor or up towards the public gallery that was packed with their family members. Now, those 7 defendants who will be sentenced tomorrow for a string of child sexual offences are Mohammed Amar, aged 42, Yasser Ajaib, 39, Mohammed Zamir Sadiq, 49, Mohammed Siab, 49, Abid Sadiq, 43, Tahir Yassin, 38, and Ramin Bari. Now, after that first survivor gave her direct victim impact statement, there was a brief pause before the second impact statement was read out by one of the prosecuting barristers, while that other survivor watched on through a video link in a separate courtroom. She said, "Your actions, which briefly satisfied your desires, have had a lifelong effect on me. I am a survivor and I am a fighter. I will continue to be strong and continue to seek justice. I am now in control of my life." She closed by saying, "You violated and humiliated me when I was a vulnerable child. Now it's your turn to feel as I did." Again, as those statements delivered by one of the prosecuting barristers, all of the men in the dock looking away, either at the ground, at each other, or at their families. Visible signs of emotion from within the dock was seen, and the only other thing that was heard while those deliveries were made by the victim and by the prosecuting barrister was the translation into Urdu. Otherwise, it was a silent and emotionally charged courtroom. They will be sentenced tomorrow, all 7 of those defendants, and the judge here, His Honour Judge Michael Slater, said that they could expect lengthy custodial sentences. We did have mitigating statements made by all 7 defence barristers, but they all conceded that they were under no illusions as to what will happen here tomorrow morning.
Charlie Peters, it's a very, very difficult thing to listen to. It must have been even harder for those astonishing survivors to have read out that face to face, looking them in the eye, their abusers in the eye. Charlie Peters, you were there. Do you think this is finally going to help those amazing young women find resolution?
Yes, I think they very much appreciate the opportunity to deliver those victim impact statements. And I've spoken to several other survivors from the Rotherham abuse scandal who have had this opportunity to deliver them in court. Of course, they don't need to take them themselves. Many of them do not want to see their abusers ever again. But it has been delivered in these Operation Stovewood trials. That's the name of the operation that the National Crime Agency launched in 2018. It's secured now well over 38 convictions, over 250 arrests. They've also identified some 1,150 victims, all of whom they have tried to contact, understandably, because many of these girls and boys were let down so severely by the authorities at the height of the abuse from 1997 to 2013. Not all of them have cooperated with the NCA, but it's undoubtedly the case that the NCA, Britain's FBI, has made a significant impact in securing justice for those victims.
Charlie Peters, thank you for that harrowing but vital report, and I pray they get the resolution and peace they deserve tomorrow at that trial sentencing. Thank you very much, Charlie Peters there from Sheffield Crown Court. That's a harrowing way to end the show, but I think you agree their stories must be told. Up next.
Now, 7 Rotherham child abusers have been jailed for cumulatively over 100 years after harrowing crimes against girls.
Yes, today's sentencing is the result of a 5-year investigation by the National Crime Agency. This is part of Operation Stovewood.
Well, to get the very latest on this, our national reporter Charlie Peters is live for us at Sheffield Crown Court. Charlie, today what happened?
Well, today the sentences were handed down. The judge briefly refreshed the court on the case, reminding them of some of what we heard during that 9-week trial, which concluded here in June. And he also thanked both of the survivors for being present in court, sat in the jury section underneath the public gallery so they could watch the defendants, all 7, being taken away to lengthy custodial sentences. And then those sentences were handed down. Because there were 7 men and the crimes were so lengthy, the judge, Mr. Justice Slater, had to take a break after delivering 4 to summarise the other 3. Those 7 men sent down today are Mohammed Amar. He was given 14 years imprisonment. Yasser Ajaib, given 6 years imprisonment. Mohammed Zamir Sadiq, 15 years imprisonment. Mohammed Siab, 25 years imprisonment. He had to listen to his sentence being handed down by an Urdu interpreter who sat with him in the dock. When the sentence was handed down, there was an exasperated shock from the public gallery as one member of his family shouted, "I love you, Dad." The judge said he was a persistent and cruel sexual offender. He was 27 at the time of the offending from 2003 onwards. The girl he raped was 11 years old, and she was sat in the court to watch as he was sent down to that shock from the public gallery. And then after a break, Mr. Justice Slater sentenced Abid Sadiq, age 43, to 24 years imprisonment, another lengthy sentence. He said that he was a cunning and determined sexual predator, despite his learning difficulties. He went on to say that he committed these crimes while he was under investigation for a separate set of sex offences. "You knew what you were up to and you continued doing it," was the line from His Honour Judge Michael Slater. And then two more had to be sentenced. Tahir Yassin, age 38, he was given 13 years imprisonment, and Ramin Barry was given 9 years imprisonment, concluding the sentencing hearing at Sheffield Crown Court. And those were for a string of child sexual offences, indecent assault, rape, and also trafficking charges. Some of the details of the harrowing and dehumanising abuse were reassessed in the court and resurfaced in the discussion by the judge, who pointed to them being abused in a cemetery, even behind a nursery, in supermarket car parks, how they were trafficked out of Rotherham, taken to hotels, how in one case, one of the victims, well, just a young teenager, had to jump through the window of one of her abuser's homes to escape. And yesterday at Sheffield Crown Court, I had one of the most moving experiences I've had as a journalist, watching one of those victims deliver her victim impact statement in person, stood at the witness box next to the judge while staring down all 7 defendants who looked left, who looked right, they looked anywhere but towards her, as she described how they had taken her childhood from her. She said, "You stole my childhood, you stole my innocence, but she was taking control now." She said, 22 years ago you groomed me, 10 years ago, I started my fight for justice, and now I am taking your freedom. I am your karma. The second victim had her victim impact statement read out by the prosecuting barrister. She said that she hoped those defendants now preparing for lengthy jail sentences would feel as vulnerable and as isolated as she had in the 20 years since the dehumanising and harrowing abuse had taken place.
That is such a brave thing to do as a victim of such horrific crimes, to stand there and give your victim statement in front of 7 men who abused girls of such young ages for so long. Now, this all happened back in the early 2000s, didn't it, Charlie? It's taken this long for justice to be served. Have we had any response from any of the victims or the victims' families on the sentencing?
Not yet, but I expect I'll hear later from one of the survivors who I've met before and who I was expecting to be present in court today to stare down those defendants as the sentences were delivered. But this is part of Operation Stovewood, the National Crime Agency's investigation into the historic non-familial abuse that took place in Rotherham from 1997 to 2013. In 2014, the scandal was exposed in a report by Alexis J, a social worker, who found that some 1,400 girls and some boys had been abused in the town by predominantly Pakistani grooming gangs, sex abuse gangs. And she found that many of the authorities involved in investigating did not do so. The local authorities looked the other way for fear of being accused of racist and in order to prioritise community cohesion over justice for girls who were left at the hands of these shocking predators. Now, Operation Stovewood was launched in 2014 to really fix what South Yorkshire Police had failed during that period. They've identified some 1,150 victims. They've made over 250 arrests. They've made 38 convictions from their prosecutions. By my count, this is the second biggest set of prosecutions they've achieved. Previously, there was a 13-strong gang, but that was split across 2 different trials due to the size of that gang involved. So there have been some significant steps forward, but some survivors in the town have told me regularly that 38 prosecutions is not nearly enough. We have had some reaction just in the last 15 minutes from the CPS. They said that all children have the right to be safe and protected. They said that these 7 men deliberately preyed on young girls they knew were vulnerable and, using drugs and alcohol, exploited them for their own sexual gratification. And the NCA said that they wanted to pay tribute to the victims who were brave enough to come forward, tell their stories and confront their abusers. That confrontation we saw yesterday. The NCA added, what happened to them can never be undone, but I hope the sentences handed down give them some closure and make them feel as though justice has been done.
Well, Charlie Peters, thank you for that moving report. We'll be back with you, of course, later in the programme as well. I'm looking forward to hearing more from some of those victims. It's a truly shocking story, and I'm glad that some justice has been done today.